here is where the president is going to be for the time being, at least, until they sort out whether this wave of attacks is over. The Strategic Air Command is been removed from our consciousness a lot because of the end of the Cold War, but now we know what the consequences are of having one war over and another begin. This is an act of terrorism that has occurred here today. We're going to go to Pat Dawson now as we look at these scenes of what it's like in lower Manhattan. The phrase nuclear winter has been used again and again, and it's not inappropriate. Pat?
No, it's not, Tom. Certainly, I can tell you that when we were standing just about 2 or 3 blocks south of here at that bridge that you can see down there, probably at that point about 6, 7, 8 blocks north of the World Trade Center this morning when that tower went down and the smoke literally billowed and the dust up the avenue. It was precisely like the movies that we have seen. Much of this is like movies. It is very, very hard as a reporter. You know that the first thing you do is reach for something to make a comparison to. And frankly, through much of this, it's almost impossible for me to find things that are a satisfactory comparison. Let us try to find out now as much as we can. This is Inspector Gene Ciccarelli from the Port Authority Police. Inspector, if you can give us some sense at this point of how close you are able to get your rescue units in there.
We've been attempting to get our rescue units into the area. Unfortunately, there are areas that are under possibilities of collapsing. We're still searching a good portion of the perimeter, and as far as going in any further than that, we have to get a clearance to make sure that there is no potential danger for any further collapse that can endanger the rescue operation.
Now, just to explain to the people who may not know this, and certainly people outside New York who don't, there are 2 towers, or were, to be more accurate, 2 towers of the World Trade Center complex, yet there are still other fairly large office buildings as part of the complex, correct?
There are other what they call plaza buildings surrounding the 2 twin towers.
Right, and those are how big?
Some of them range from 20 stories, approximately 20 stories.
By the standards of much of America, that would be a skyscraper, quite frankly.
Well, I wouldn't put them on the
But
level.
still, they're rather large buildings. They're still standing there. Is that part of the threat that you perceive at this point?
Yes, there are those other plaza buildings that we are concerned about and do have the potential of collapsing. So, in answer to your question, it isn't wise to enter into that area at this point.
How would you describe your efforts to organize the rescue effort now, given that we saw a sequence of events this morning, a sequence of crashes, then explosions, and then the collapses? How close are you now, perhaps, to being able to organize an actual rescue effort to go in there and start going through the debris?
We still have, like I said, a concern about going in and initiating a rescue. If, in fact, there are other individuals there. We also have a very good operation in place at this time to pool all of our resources together in one staging area. That we have a phenomenal amount of equipment and supplies that would assure us of any efforts that we make to continue with the rescue approach. But at this point, we do have a good group assembled for that purpose.
But at this point, presumably there may be a great number of people in there in need of rescue. Obviously, the problem for you is that if you go in to try to get them out, you put your rescuers in danger.
That's correct.
And no idea of when you might be in a position to actually say, we think it's safe to go in after them now.
No, until we get a firm clearance on that, we won't enter into an area that could be hazardous to people that are attempting to make the rescue.
Inspector, thank you very much for speaking to us. We appreciate it. Tom, the latest from the Port Authority Police here in New York City. As we've explained, they have jurisdiction over the World Trade Center complex. They, of course, are working in cooperation with a number of other police and rescue and fire agencies here, both local and federal, and essentially describing the quandary that they find themselves in, which is rather rare, certainly unique in the sense that we have seen the catastrophe repeatedly. We have seen through the morning 3 or 4 events which would qualify by anyone's description as catastrophes. It has now been probably a good 4 hours since the last one, but yet they still can't go in and begin a serious, comprehensive rescue effort because they're worried about what might still be there, what danger might still lurk for the rescuers that have gone in. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's Pat Dawson. this terrorist war that has been declared on America today in New York City and Washington, D.C., and psychologically across the country has had such an enormous effect already. It has all but immobilized the largest nation in the world politically. There's been a severe realignment of where people can go and do their jobs in the nation's capital. Dennis Hastert, the House Speaker, was whisked out of his office. The President of the United States, we believe right now, is at the Strategic Air Command headquarters outside of Omaha. We don't know where Vice President Cheney is, except we're told that he's in a secure location. Don Rumsfeld is back at his desk in a more secure location. Secretary of State Colin Powell is on his way back from Peru. Then you have the economic consequences. The largest financial market in the world was shut down today. People were in peril in that immediate vicinity. Businesses across America are doing no business, my guess is. Certainly in the largest cities, so many of them have been shut down. All flights have been grounded at this point, and all baseball games have been suspended. The Seattle Space Needle was shut down. Walt Disney World was evacuated. In California, Knott's Berry Farm was evacuated, and a lot of other theme parks. All national monuments have been evacuated today as well. This country is on hold in shock and horror, and probably the beginning of a great deal of anger and frustration as well. We're told that all planes now that were in the air have landed safely. The domestic flights, there are still some international flights that are yet to come here. We'll have to deal with our shock and grief in the days to come, and there will be a realignment of this country in so many ways, the forms of which we cannot say now, because we're going to have to work this out together, individually, and certainly from our political and our economic institutions. But certainly there will be a change in security and a loss of innocence, especially for young people who have never been through anything quite like this. The most devastating attack since Pearl Harbor, some people saying worse than Pearl Harbor at this time. Let's go to Virginia Chow of NBC News, who was down in the area. Virginia, what was it like?
Well, Tom, you've already heard the unbelievable stories of people who survived, who are much closer to ground zero at the World Trade Center area. I was about 20 blocks north of that, and I witnessed the second tower collapsing. And what I observed, and what was amazing to me, were the reactions of the people as they watched this unfold around them. You have to remember that these are people who were streaming away from that area, who just minutes before were near the building or perhaps even in the building. And as I headed on foot going toward the World Trade Center, this was this morning when there was one tower still remaining. The first one had already collapsed. I was about 20 blocks north of there. There were thousands of people literally streaming toward me on foot, trying to escape that area like refugees from a war zone. I was one of the lone people, other than emergency personnel, heading toward the area when we heard a rumble. People stopped, turned to look, and we watched in horror as the second tower came crashing down on itself. People screaming out, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh no." And immediately, very emotional, people crying in tears, realizing that there were hundreds, maybe thousands of people in and around that building who were going to be either badly hurt or killed. And I think that the emotional impact of this for people, even if they don't know anyone personally down there, has been devastating. Tom?
Thank you very much, Virginia Chow, who is one of the many NBC reporters who have gone beyond the call of duty today in the lower part of Manhattan. There is the scene. It was not a cruise missile. It was not a nuclear attack. It was a hijacked airliner used as a weapon directed at the World Trade Center. The Twin Towers both came down. We know that more than 100 people on the airliners were killed, and an untold number of people were killed or seriously wounded in and around that area. And as you look at these scenes from several hours after the planes hit the building and after the World Trade Center came down, you have some sense of the magnitude of the devastation. Jules Rennell is the manager of the World Trade Club at the World Trade Center. He, fortunately for him, was not there today. Mr. Rennell, how many people would be in the building, in your judgment, at 8:45 in the morning?
This is a News 4 special report.
We are interrupting briefly to try to keep you abreast of the events happening locally in our area today, where the Pentagon was one of the subjects of terrorist attacks, Doreen.
Fire and rescue crews from all over our area are on the scene at the Pentagon right now trying to put out the fire there and help the victims who have been injured and killed. Let's go live to Sarah Lee at the Virginia Hospital Center, or used to be Arlington Hospital, where some of the injured from the Pentagon have been taken. Sarah?
Doreen, Jim, I'm told at last count about 30 patients have been brought here to Virginia Hospital Center, varying in degrees of their injuries and their conditions. Joining me right now live, however, is Catherine Hughes with Virginia Hospital Center. Thank you so much for joining us for this update. At this point, could you just talk to me about the hospital personnel that are in place for this disaster situation?
Sure. We have made sure to have a full staff here. We've called in anyone that's been on call. We probably have over 100 nurses that are here and prepared to take care of any patients, as well as over 50 of our physicians are here and are ready to take care of any patients. We have taken care of 30 at this point and do expect to see more.
As you do expect to see more, have any patients been diverted? Do you expect any may have to be diverted as you get more and more patients here?
We have not diverted any patients at this time. We are fully prepared to take whatever load may come, and so I don't think at this point we'll need to divert.
Earlier, I was speaking with the assistant director of the emergency department. He did also say that he headed up the disaster team here at the hospital. Could you explain exactly what that is?
We have a team that's a multidisciplinary team of all individuals that are important to handling a crisis or a disaster. We do practice drills throughout the year to make sure we're prepared for anything like this, and I would say that the team has pulled together and it's an extraordinary job today in this issue of a crisis.
And with so many patients coming in with varying degrees of medical problems, obviously the need for blood is great. What should we be telling people in terms of donating blood and how they can help the hospitals?
Absolutely. They would be greatly appreciated if they can go to the American Red Cross. They are the ones that are accepting blood. At this point, we're not in a crisis type of situation, but they have been able to supply us with blood in the event that we do need that. 1-800-GIVE-BLOOD would be the number for them to call to get to the location where they can give blood.
Great. Thank you very much. Catherine Hughes with Virginia Hospital Centers. Now, again, there are 30 patients that have been brought here to Virginia Hospital Centers from the Pentagon situation. 13 of those patients have been admitted here. 6 have been discharged, mostly suffering from blasts, smoke inhalation, burns, some people having fractures to their extremities, their arms, their legs. We were told, however, by the assistant chair of the emergency department that 8 people are in intensive care right now, 4 on ventilators. And he did tell us that those conditions are life-threatening. Let's hear what he had told us earlier.
We've seen a variety of injuries. I guess a lot of those we've seen are typically associated with a blast-type injuries. We've seen a lot of smoke inhalation injuries, and those people have been some of the sickest folks here. We've also seen some fractures of the extremities, also burns to the face and hands. Those have been the primary injuries we've seen.
And just about 10 minutes ago, before you came back to us here at Arlington, a Virginia blood mobile did pull up, and they did wheel in about 2 cases, it looked like, of blood into the emergency room. And the hospital did confirm for us that that blood was brought in for this disaster situation. So again, the need for blood is great. So for anyone who's watching this and wants to help in any way, contact the American Red Cross and do give blood, because it certainly will be needed beyond today, well into the week, as long as people are still suffering from those injuries. Sarah Lee live in Arlington. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Sarah Lee. On the matter of blood, let's talk with Dr. Jean Lamadou. She's with the Inova Blood Bank. Dr. Lamadou, are you there?
Yes, I am.
What is the situation now in terms of the need for blood?
The need for blood is quite great. Currently, we are collecting blood from all types of donors. We are going to be supplying our hospitals in the metropolitan D.C. area that need blood on first. But then if we get a request from any New York hospitals or any other hospitals that are affected that need our blood, we would ship to them secondarily.
Dr. Lamadou, I spoke on the phone earlier with someone who called to say they have been trying to call the Red Cross and can't get through. They want to know if there's some place that people can go to donate blood.
Our facility is located at 3289 Woodburn Road in Annandale, Virginia. It is on the corner of Woodburn and Gallows Road. We are staying open indefinitely. In addition, Inova Blood Donor Services has a location at the CenterMed location on Route 28 in Centerville in Virginia, and we are open there as well.
Okay, Dr. Lamadou, we were told earlier that people should wait until tomorrow if they want to donate blood. What about that?
Well, we are currently taking donors. We're staying open around the clock. We are doing all of our testing and necessary processing around the clock. We have no plans right now to close. until the patient's needs are met. And donate tomorrow if you can. Donate this evening. Right now, our donors probably have a 2 to 3 hour wait. If you want to come back in the evening, that's perfectly fine. But please donate.
All right, and Dr. Lamadou, I believe that the Red Cross is suggesting that people wait until tomorrow to donate blood, and certainly it would not be a good idea for anybody to go to a hospital at this today to try to help by donating blood.
We've had an outpouring of volunteers. People always want to help out in these sorts of situations. If you're a medical personnel assigned to a hospital, it's kind of a different story. But sometimes hospitals and medical facilities can't always use untrained volunteers to do anything except simple tasks.
They're in a crisis mode right now, anticipating more victims coming in from the Pentagon. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Jean Lamadou, talking with us about the blood donation situation. We want to go next to Mary Alice Salinas. She has been covering the situation at Dulles Airport, where it has been very, very quiet since they evacuated the airport earlier. Mary Alice, what's going on there now?
Doreen, I want to let you know that we have seen FBI agents here just in the last hour. They've been going to ticket counters at different airlines here, talking with employees. We have some video of 3 agents at this particular point. They were talking with some employees at the Northwest counter. They seem to be they were asking questions of this employee or apparent employee. This person was getting onto the computer system, getting information, relaying that to FBI agents. He also disappeared into a back room, came back out, offered more information. Then the FBI agents went off to other ticket counters. We understand that they were at an American Airlines ticket counter earlier today. Of course, this is where the flight that crashed in the Pentagon started. American Airlines Flight 77 headed here from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles. There were 58 passengers on board that flight, 6 crew members. Airport authorities are also telling us that any loved ones of the people on board Flight 77 are being sent to the Dulles Marriott near here to get information. They have set something up there for the moment. So we still have military aircraft going overhead every once in a while. We have FBI agents inside. I also want to mention that these concrete barriers went up pretty quickly this morning after all this started happening. There are a series of concrete barriers around Washington Dulles right now. So that is the situation right here. Family members are being sent once again to the Marriott Hotel nearby. Doreen, back to you.
All right, Mary Alice Salinas reporting live from Dulles Airport. Dulles is closed. Reagan National Airport is closed. BWI is closed. Every airport in America is closed right now, and we are being told that all domestic flights in this country are grounded until at least noon tomorrow.
Mayor Williams went before the microphones a short time ago to declare a state of emergency in the District of Columbia. Here's more of what the mayor had to say.
Our first priority is to be able to respond effectively to the emergency situations as they arise. To that end, and to ensure that we have the highest level of preparedness, I have declared a state of emergency in the District of Columbia so that emergency vehicles can move throughout our neighborhoods and so that in the event of an incident here in the district, we are fully prepared. I'm also communicating regularly with the White House and have the full support of our federal emergency agencies as well as the cooperation of the D.C. National Guard. I'd like to ask our citizens to remain calm and to work with us to get vehicles off the street as quickly as possible. Unless you are emergency personnel, medical and public safety professionals, unless you have some specific business, picking your kids up from school or the like, please stay at home. We're also working.
All right, D.C. Mayor Anthony Williams declaring a state of emergency. If you don't need to be out on the roads in the city today and tonight, don't go out. The D.C. National Guard has been mobilized so that they can be called upon to help in whatever way needed in the city right now. Also, as you just heard the mayor saying, he's requesting that people stay indoors unless you need to be out. Do not go out. Don't make any trips that are not absolutely essential. Stay home and stay tuned for further information on what you should do in this situation.
Earlier today, federal offices were evacuated, and the federal government was, in effect, shut down. There was a lot of traffic on the streets of Washington and its near environs at that time. James Adams is in downtown Washington right now. James, what's the situation now?
Well, we're at about 15th and Constitution, and as the day has worn on, the security zone that has been established pretty much from the White House out has been pressed further and further out in each direction. As you can see, taking a look down 15th Street, it is now an empty street where there were barricades. There are now police cars, and that situation is basically being mirrored on 15th Street, 17th Street, 19th Street. We went over to E, G Street. All of them have been closed down. The national monuments, of course, have been shut down. At the flags are now flying at half staff, as you can see, and very much to our west, going down Connecticut Avenue, there is also a platoon now of officers where you would normally enter the ellipse area. They are now stationed there. Within the last hour, the people who were on the other side of Constitution Avenue were forced back once again. So the perimeter, once again, of security has been widened. There are also officers walking around. Their guns are out, shotguns. We've seen some with rifles. And basically, behind me, it is nearly a ghost town. A very sharp contrast to what we saw this morning.
James Adams, thank you, James. Dan Tagliani with the D.C. Department of Public Works is standing by now at the Reeves Center. He is making an address.
Based on the decision about schools, about the federal government, about local government, as to when and how our transportation system will operate beyond this point. But right now, again, the only closures are key Memorial and 14th Street bridges inbound. All other bridges are open, and only in the area immediately surrounding the White House. I'll give you the perimeter: Constitution Avenue, I Street, 14th Street, and 18th Street. Those streets around the White House and the area in the middle are also closed in defense of the White House. Right now, though, just again based on aerial survey, our traffic cameras and pavement sensors, traffic seems to be moving well around the city.
If I could, are there any other questions at this moment? If I cannot give you the update on the number of people at this point. This is all very preliminary information. I think that we need to wait until we have a little more coming out of our sources from the Pentagon. It's several people that we've been told have been transported to local hospitals and to the burn center. I think the number was 7 or 8 to the burn center and several others. I don't know the number to local Northern Virginia hospitals near the Pentagon. If I could, we've been joined today by the Mayor of Los Angeles, Jim Hahn, who would like to take this moment to say a few words.
I'm Jim Hahn, Mayor of Los Angeles. As you know, at least 2, maybe 3 of the planes that were hijacked and crashed were destined to arrive in Los Angeles. And so this tragedy is touching people all over the country, as we know. My heart certainly goes out to the victims and the victims' families in New York City and those injured here in Washington, D.C., but also families who were touched all over America by this tragedy. We certainly hope that as Americans that we come together at this time and stand united in our resolve to overcome these terrible acts and also to reaffirm our commitment to our freedom. In Los Angeles this morning, early on, city Emergency Operations Center was activated. Los Angeles Police Department went on full tactical alert. As you heard a while ago, the Los Angeles International Airport was evacuated. The City Hall of Los Angeles has been closed to ordinary business. It's being occupied only by essential personnel now who are needed at City Hall for today. I've been in contact this morning with LA Police Chief Bernard Parks, our City Council President Alex Padilla, and I'm actively monitoring the situation. I was able to listen in on the Emergency Operations Board meeting sounds like we are taking all necessary precautions in Los Angeles, in all public buildings. A number of the buildings in downtown Los Angeles, the taller buildings, have voluntarily decided to close for the day. Certainly those of us who are from Los Angeles, I know there's a lot of families who were expecting to meet their loved ones at LA International Airport. I certainly am offering my assistance in the city to all of those families and anything that we can do for them.
Mayor Hahn, what were you doing here in the district?
Well, I was here meeting with, scheduled to meet with Secretary of Housing and Urban Development to talk about housing issues in Los Angeles, transportation issues, and education issues with the Secretary of Education, and to meet with our congressional delegation. I was meeting with Ruben Barales, who is the White House liaison to local government, intergovernmental affairs director when this tragic story broke. And then
the mayor of Los Angeles, who is speaking to us from the Reeves Center, he is here and in fact cannot get home because there are no flights back home.
He's exemplary of a whole lot of Americans right now who would very much like to get home. I'm sure he'd like to get home and get to his command center in his city. And like so many Americans, nobody is traveling. Flights are grounded until at least until noon tomorrow. We want to share with you some phone numbers. People are having trouble communicating. Phone lines are a problem. But as they assess what has happened at the Pentagon and as they try to figure out the casualties that they have there, the Navy is asking all on-duty Navy and Marine workers who were in the Pentagon when that explosion happened this morning to please call and report their status right away. These workers should call this number, 877-663-6772. That's Navy and Marine workers who were in the Pentagon this morning. Call 877-663-6772. That is only for Navy and Marine workers who were in the Pentagon this morning. No one else should call that line.
Family and friends who need information about United Airlines flights, two of which were involved in the terrorist attacks today, are invited to call 800-932-8555. Information is also posted for United Airlines on its website at www.united.com.
Two of the hijacked flights this morning were American airline flights, including Flight 77 that left Dulles headed for Los Angeles this morning. American Airlines has a hotline for friends and families to use to get information about those two American airline flights. That number is 800-245-0999. Again, that's 800-245-0999.
Pat Collins is down at the Reeves Center now. He's with one of the city officials there. Pat?
Jim, I'm with Deputy Mayor Margaret Kellum. She's the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety. Let's take it from the top. First of all, you're aware of no specific threats against any structure or place in the city of Washington?
Not at this time. There were a number of calls about suspicious packages or vehicles or people. As of a few moments ago, as far as I know, all of those had been cleared. We have not had any additional specific threats against the district.
What advice can you give the citizens of Washington? If they're home now, should they feel safe to go to the store, go to a restaurant, take a walk around the block?
People should feel safe. We have no indication of any threats right now in the district. We are remaining vigilant. We are remaining cautious. But we are telling people, go ahead with your everyday lives. Go to the store, take a walk around the block, and enjoy this day.
What about the police? Are the police out there in force?
Every officer in the Metropolitan Police Department is on duty at the moment. We're going to work in 12-hour shifts until we feel like we can relax this heightened level of security. The same is true at the fire department. We have additional patrols around the buildings, and we have additional patrols out in the neighborhoods.
Now, I know you've made a request of people, if they see something suspicious, don't call 911.
What we're asking people, because of the number of calls that were coming in, obviously, and we want to do this as efficiently as we can, we're asking people to limit their 911 calls to actual crimes in progress or other life-threatening circumstances when they absolutely must have emergency assistance at that moment. If you see something out of the ordinary, a package or a vehicle, of course we want you to call, but we suggest that you call 311. We have established additional capacity there to manage these calls right now.
Will the district government be open tomorrow?
As far as we know at this point, we are operating under the assumption that it will be. But again, we are remaining vigilant. We are going to the buildings. We are doing what we need to do to make sure everything is safe. If there is any change in this, we'll make announcements throughout the day, watch the evening news. But as far as we can tell at this point, we are planning for business as usual tomorrow.
Will D.C. schools be open tomorrow?
They also are planning for business as usual tomorrow. As everyone, I think, knows, the schools stayed open today. Your children were safe. They were in their schools. They finished their classes. And we're anticipating the same thing will happen tomorrow. But again, I encourage you, check the Washington, D.C. Website, watch the news, listen to the radio. If there's any change in that, we'll let people know immediately.
Is there still a state of emergency here in the District of Columbia?
We did declare a state of emergency. It has not been rescinded. We have the National Guard working with us. We activated the National Guard to make sure, again, we're being cautious and we're being vigilant in our security measures.
But people should feel safe to go out.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Margaret Collins, she's the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety. If anything changes, we're here. We'll bring it to you. Jim, back to you.
All right, thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Pat.
There's some other information that you might need to know today. Susan Kidd is in our newsroom with that, Sue.
Well, Jim, you just heard that the city has declared a state of emergency, and also Virginia's Governor Jim Gilmore has declared a state of emergency, and that gives him the power to instantly mobilize military and police forces statewide. Gilmore says there was no threat to the state that prompted that declaration. The step was taken to allow the governor to instantly dispatch the state's police, National Guard, and emergency personnel, just as he would in response to a devastating storm. Gilmore heads a federal anti-terrorism panel, interestingly enough. That panel concluded that such a terrorist attack was a high probability and that the nation was woefully unprepared for dealing with it. He says it's going to take weeks to absorb the human tragedy of the attacks. Also, Maryland Governor Paris Glendening has declared a state of emergency. Glendening has closed all state offices except those dealing with emergency situations. As you've mentioned, all airports around the country, all airports in this area are closed, and a spokesperson for National Airport says that airport will remain closed until tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. at the earliest. It may not reopen then. Also, we have some bus and train information to share with you. Virginia Railway Express is now operating limited service. The Fredericksburg line will run trains out of Union Station at 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. There is conflicting information about Union Station being closed. We sympathize with those folks trying to track down loved ones who are on trains, but our information now says that VRE is operating limited service, and the Fredericksburg line will run trains out of Union Station this evening. Also, MARC train service is suspended. MARC train service is suspended, but MARC is running buses at New Carrollton, Silver Spring, Branch Avenue, and Shady Grove. MARC will transport passengers to suburban MARC stations. Those buses are not running on a fixed schedule. You just heard city officials talking about some of the bridges that are closed coming into the district. There are many roads that are shut down. Inbound routes 50, 66, 29, and the George Washington Parkway are closed. The Key Bridge, the Memorial Bridge, and the 14th Street bridges inbound are closed. We just heard city officials say outbound should not be a problem. Also, Associated Press is reporting that only medical personnel are being allowed in. Route 50 closed at George Mason Drive, and Columbia Pike is closed at Glebe Road. We're also told that the Washington Cathedral is closed for safety precautions, but officials there say daily prayers will not be interrupted. And we have information about some other church services around the area. The Good Shepherd Chapel and the Cathedral Garth are open for the daily round of prayers for the nation and for private prayers until 4:30 this afternoon. And the Cathedral is planning an interfaith national prayer service for some time in the week ahead. This information is changing rapidly, and we'll try to keep you posted as it comes in. Jim, Doreen?
Thanks, Susan.
All right, thank you, Susan. The fire continues to burn at the Pentagon, where an airplane crashed into it early this morning. Let's go live to Megan McGrath there for an update on what's happening at the Pentagon. Megan?
Well, you can see that there is still smoke coming off the very top of the Pentagon, and rescue crews are still hitting out hot spots that keep popping up inside. This was an extremely intense fire that occurred after the plane hit the side of the Pentagon, and actually the intensity of the fire, the heat and the smoke was a difficult situation for the emergency crews who responded here on the team. They, of course, get here. They want to knock out the fire, and more importantly, they want to get to the people who are perhaps trapped inside the building. Because the building itself was sort of structurally compromised by the impact with the plane, that combined with the heat, the flames, and the smoke, it really was a difficult situation for rescue crews. They were not able to get people inside the building until a little bit before 2 o'clock this afternoon, and we're told that Fairfax County and Montgomery County search and rescue crews are here on the scene. They are right now inside looking for anybody who may have been trapped when this all happened, but just absolutely devastating. It is hard to believe, looking at the side of the building, what has happened here today. There is just tremendous amount of destruction to the building. You can see the area where the plane impacted. It's this southwest ring. The video that you're seeing right now was shot by someone on one of those small digital cameras, and it's pretty dramatic. You can see some of the rescues that are being made. And it was just a very confusing situation, a very chaotic situation, because, of course, people did not know what was going on. Suddenly there was this blast. Some people saw the plane as it impacted the side of the building. Other people who were here inside working in the Pentagon had no idea what happened. They did not see the plane. All they saw was the fireball, or they felt the building shake, or they saw the smoke and the flames, which then ripped through the building. And a very frightening situation, as you can imagine. About 23,000 people work inside the Pentagon. This happened in the morning when a lot of people were reporting for work. And that's a big concern here. They're trying to figure out where people were at the time that this happened. They're trying to get an idea on how many people were inside the building, how many people potentially were injured or unfortunately even killed in this incident. And actually, they're asking for the assistance of people who work at the Pentagon. There's a specific number that employees with the Navy and the Marine Corps are asked to call, just to give a call, tell officials where they are and that they're okay, so that they can get a better idea how many people they may be looking for who may be trapped inside the rubble. That phone number, if you've got it there, is 877-663-6772. They are asking that you only call that phone number if you are with the Navy or the Marine Corps and you work in the Pentagon. It is not an information line. Call so that people can keep a better tally of who is in the building at the time. But it's a difficult situation because when this happened, people simply ran out of the building. And so in terms of trying to figure out who might still be inside, it's very difficult to track down a number and very difficult to figure out just who is inside. So a very difficult situation. I know a lot of people very, very upset. This was a shocking thing to occur. You always think that something like this won't happen in this country, and specifically to target the Pentagon, which is a symbol of the U.S. military and its power. It's a little shocking, and there are a lot of people who are stunned here, and a lot of people who are very fearful of friends, family, relatives that they have who work at the Pentagon, and they haven't been able to track them down. One of the problems that we have been encountering here, and I know it's the same situation throughout town, is that the cellular phone lines are absolutely jammed. So if you're trying to get in contact with somebody and you pick up the phone, 9 times out of 10 or 19 times out of 20 even, you're not going to get through. And so that's been a frustrating situation with people not being able to contact loved ones. We should also mention that the Navy hospital ship, the USNS Comfort, that is the Navy's hospital ship, is apparently in Baltimore right now. They are going to be outfitting that ship with personnel from the Bethesda Naval Hospital, and they are going to be deploying that ship, likely, it sounds, to New York to deal with the situation there. And also in the latest briefing that we got from a Pentagon official, there have been 2 ships that have been activated, actually aircraft carriers, the John F. Kennedy and the George Washington. Now, in terms of where exactly they're being deployed, no information was given with regard to that, just that they have been activated. They are on standby for whatever is needed in the situation. And so really things have quieted down somewhat here on the scene. You can see that the fire is pretty much under control. That's not to say that it's completely out, but we're not seeing the flames coming out of the windows. We're not seeing the amount of smoke that we saw earlier. So it has dissipated a little bit. And actually right now, as I look at the building, we're not even seeing firefighters spraying water onto the building at all. Perhaps that's because they have those search and rescue crews inside and they don't want to be spraying the water while they're in there sifting through the rubble. But it's just a very dramatic sight to behold and a horrific one. You just see that one section completely collapsed upon itself. And just given the hour of the day, the fear is that there were people inside, and certainly a sad situation. Now, apparently there was one section, I think it was a section to the right, that had recently been renovated. So there is some hope that perhaps not everybody was moved back in, but that remains to be seen. We've heard a lot of speculation from people who work here, but it's uncertain at this point how many people were injured and how many people lost their lives. But certainly a very shocking situation, and people here are just in a state of disbelief.
Megan, I heard your reference to the search and rescue teams. Do we know that they are able to go in there now, or are they having to wait?
We were told in the latest briefing, and that was shortly before 2 o'clock this afternoon, that just prior to that briefing, that was the first opportunity that the search and rescue crews had to go inside because it was just too dangerous up until that point. The impact was one aspect of this. I mean, certainly you had a plane slamming into the side of the building, but then as soon as that event was over, you had this huge fireball. We were actually coincidentally driving through the area at the time. We heard the pop, and then looked up into the sky, and there was a huge fireball that just rose from the Pentagon. You instantly knew something was very, very wrong. So you had that initial impact with the plane, but then you had this fireball that just ripped through the building, and that was creating a whole nother set of dangers. People who weren't necessarily in the impact area where the plane actually struck, they were still being impacted by the fire that was going through the building and just the tremendous amount of smoke. Smoke was just billowing from the source of impact and all along the roof line, and the fire seemed to spread off to the left-hand side of the building. As the hours went on, you would see the fire kind of going down through the other side, the left-hand side of the building, and so a lot of people who weren't necessarily in the immediate area that was affected, they still had to deal with the heat and with the smoke. So it was a very difficult situation for the people here as well as for the emergency crews.
All right, Megan, we know it is likely to take some time before before we get an injury and death toll out of this situation at the Pentagon. What we do know, what we have heard throughout the morning, 30 patients in different conditions are being treated at Virginia Hospital Center, 20 patients at Washington Hospital Center, and we do know that 64 people were on board that American Airlines Flight 77 that is believed to be the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. But as far as a total number on how many casualties we are going to see when this is all over with, we just don't have it.
Thank you, Megan, for your report from the Pentagon. Governor Paris Glendening of Maryland is with us on the phone now. Governor Glendening, are you there?
Yes, I am.
This is certainly, I guess, kind of uncharted waters. None of us has ever been through something like this before. How are you handling this, Governor?
Well, obviously, like most Marylanders and Americans, both a sense of outrage, a sense of extraordinary sympathy for everyone is killed and injured in this. I have talked early this morning with Governor Pataki of New York and offered whatever assistance, both medical and National Guard and equipment that we can provide, and our staffs are working together on that. I've also talked to Governor Gilmore to assistance there, as well as Mayor Williams. We are already providing assistance. For example, our National Guard military police have been called up and have been federalized to help provide additional security in the nation's capital area. In addition to this, we have received some threats that have some degree of credibility to them for facilities in Maryland. We have secured those facilities. Right now, our priorities are try to make sure that we have the security to protect Marylanders and Maryland facilities, and then secondly, to offer assistance to our neighbors, and as well as to try to sort out the tremendous transportation problems that engulf the nation's capital.
Governor, are these threats that came in today?
Pardon?
You mentioned threats on Maryland facilities. Are these threats that came in today?
Yes. The head of our state police, Dave Mitchell, received a list of 11 sites across the country that were targets. Supposedly this list had been distributed prior to the explosions. Several of those sites were ones that were under attack, and two of the sites were in Maryland, the state capitol, as well as the World Trade Center in Baltimore. We cannot verify the credibility of that threat, but we obviously had to take it as very real, given what we see going on across the country. And that is part of the reason that we issued the state of emergency and fully evacuated and secured those facilities.
Governor, have those buildings been evacuated? Have you left the state capitol?
I am, in fact, in the Emergency Command Center in the Baltimore area right now. The buildings have been evacuated, secured, searched for potential bombs, and, in fact, in the World Trade Center, we have actually set up a perimeter of heavy trucks to protect that as well, and the entire state complex has been secured with an outer perimeter. We cannot verify with certainty, but we are working with the federal intelligence agencies on this, the validity of that list, except that several of the targets on the list were those actual targets that were impacted under these attacks.
Governor, how long do you intend to keep the state of emergency in effect?
We will work closely with the federal officials on this. We'll make some further decisions tonight about opening state buildings tomorrow and about state employees returning to work. However, the state of emergency, as I declared it, was for 48 hours, and that is for us to, on an emergency basis, transfer whatever resources, military or medical, that we need to our neighbors. And then, working with the federal officials, we will evaluate that within the 48 hours to see whether anything is needed beyond that.
Governor Glendening, what would you say to Maryland residents right now, how they should be responding to that state of emergency? Should people stay in their homes, go about business as usual? What is expected of them?
Well, first of all, sadly, I don't think there's ever going to be in this country a business as usual. I mean, the reality is that we know now that terrorism can strike home any place. But specifically, what we're asking is people to remain calm. We are receiving all kinds of rumors. We do have a rumor-controlled number established, which is 410-517-5135. And trying to dispel any of those rumors, we're asking people to remain calm, to offer their support in any way possible, including prayer. There is a call for blood, as you know. We're trying to do that, but at this moment, I think the best we can do is to be with our families and kind of stay out of the way and let the various emergency responses work as needed.
All right, thank you. Maryland Governor Paris Glendening live with us on the telephone.
Thank you.
We are trying to keep you abreast of what's going on locally. We are going to go back to network. First, we want to show you this. It is a special edition of the Washington Post that came out as a result of this day of incredibly terrible and tragic events. I'm not sure the last time the Washington Post felt compelled to do something like that.
The Persian Gulf War, maybe?
It could be. Certainly is called for today because we have not seen a day like this before. That's our broadcast for now. We'll be coming back with more in a short period of time.
Throughout the world and place them on high alert. The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe. They have also secured members of the National Security Team, the President's Cabinet, and senior staff. As you know, President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, when the first attack occurred this morning. Air Force One has now landed at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, and the President is in a secure location. He is in continuous communication with the Vice President and key members of his Cabinet and National Security Team. Vice President Cheney and our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, are in a secure facility at the White House. I have just come from there, The Secretary of Transportation and other members of our White House senior staff are gathered at a command center there, and we are coordinating with other branches of our federal government. The Secretary of Defense remains at the Pentagon, and the Secretary of State is en route back to Washington from his trip to South America. President Bush is conducting a meeting of the National Security Council as we speak. They are meeting President Bush from his location and other members from different locations in Washington and other locations. As many of you have been reporting, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all airports closed, and all planes which were in the air were directed to land at the nearest airport. International flights were diverted to alternate locations outside of the United States. Transportation Secretary Mineta has directed the Federal Aviation Administration to suspend operations until at least noon tomorrow. So no airline flights will operate until at least then and until the FAA announces that operations will be resumed. Secretary Mineta has also issued orders controlling the movement of all vessels in United States navigable waters. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated 8 urban search and rescue task forces in New York, and 4 of these highly trained teams are at work here in Washington at the Pentagon. Every federal agency has implemented continuity of operations plans to make sure the government continues to function effectively. While the markets closed today because of the situation in Manhattan, the United States financial system has continued to operate. Banks have been open all day. The Federal Reserve has operated regularly and continuously. The Department of Health and Human Services has mobilized medical personnel and supplies to provide help to local authorities who are working so diligently to respond and try to help the victims of these terrible attacks. President Bush has committed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to identify and bring to swift justice those responsible for these despicable attacks. The Department of Justice is setting up a hotline for families who fear that their relatives may have been victims of one of these attacks, and we will be announcing that telephone number shortly. Our fellow citizens and our freedom came under attack today, and no one should doubt America's resolve. President Bush and all our country's leaders thank the many Americans who are helping with rescue and relief efforts. We ask our fellow Americans for your prayers for the victims, for their families, for the rescue workers, and for our country. Thank you all very much, and we will continue to update you as information is available and confirmed.
When will the president return to the White House?
Will he be back in Washington?
One of his most trusted aides, and she's speaking on his behalf, giving us an overview of what the situation is today. He's talking about how the president ordered assistance, federal assistance for the local communities that were involved, including New York City, of course, and she said no one should doubt our national resolve in finding these people and punishing them who harmed American citizens on this day. There were a couple of additional pieces of information. Even vessels that are on navigable waters are now being controlled by the U.S. Department of Transportation. All flights will be grounded until noon tomorrow. We had already heard that. Banks did remain open, so financial services were going on today, and every federal agency had a contingency of operation plan that has been put into effect. We still have on the phone now for us one of the senior advisors in several administrations, former Secretary of State and former Secretary of the Treasury, James Baker. Mr. Baker, there's not a lot more that can be done at this hour, is there?
No, I don't think there's a lot more that can be done. I think the administration is doing what they can do and what they should do. And there's not really a lot more that can be done at this very moment, Tom.
At some point in the next 24 to 48 hours, though, the president is going to have to address the nation. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I think so. I don't doubt for 1 minute, but that he will. Now, he's already made 2 statements, I think, since these events occurred, and I rather suspect that when we get to an appropriate distance from the happening of the events, he will probably choose to address the nation.
Well, we're all most concerned right now, obviously, about those people who have been severely injured, those people who have been killed, those people who are still missing, and I want to emphasize that as our primary concern. But just looking ahead a little bit, there are going to be also economic consequences for this country just at a time when this economy is in a troubled state.
I'm not, if you're asking me that, Tom, I'm not too worried about that, frankly. I think, you know, we have a lot of systems in place that we have never had in place before as our economy weakens. Yes, we're in a weakening period here for the economy, and yes, events like this cannot be good for that. But I really am not too concerned about that. I think that you may see some negative consequences initially, but over the long haul, I think things are going to be fine.
Mr. Baker, we appreciate it very much, and we'll just ask you, if we can, once again, to presume on our long-standing professional relationship and kind of keep you on call throughout the day, because this is going to be a long day indeed.
Well, I enjoyed talking to you, Tom, but I'm going to have to, at some point, I'm going to have to find a place to sleep tonight since I can't get back to Texas.
Well, we'll make sure that it's not too late, but we intend to be on the air here for a long time. But at any rate, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. James Baker, former Secretary of the Treasury, former Secretary of State. He was, of course, President Bush the 41st, as we called him, his point man in the Persian Gulf War, tried to head off that war by meeting in Geneva with Tariq Aziz. That was unsuccessful. The war did go forward. He's a man who spends a good deal of his professional time now worrying and working on these matters that brought us to this sad state of affair that we find ourselves in America today. So we're coming up on 4 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time, one of the longest days in America, at 8:45 on a sparkling September morning here in New York City and in the nation's capital. There were 2 wholly unexpected and devastating attacks on the Pentagon and on the Twin Trade Towers. And then another plane went down outside of Pennsylvania, and we are still dealing not only with the physical effect of those attacks, all the injuries, the deaths, and the damage that has been done, but we're just beginning to have a full appreciation as well of the political and the psychological damage that may have been done to this country. Ron Insana, James Baker, as I was not surprised, said, I think we'll be okay, but there's been so much talk in the American economy about the confidence of the American consumer and how we need to kickstart the confidence of the American consumer. That is going to be a concern.
Absolutely, Tom. And the one thing that the Federal Reserve, in its effort to manage this rather noticeable slowdown in the U.S. economy, the one thing the Federal Reserve was counting on was maintaining consumer and investor confidence. It was apparently easier to maintain consumer confidence with lower interest rates than investor confidence, but the consumer has been relatively strong despite the weakness we've seen in the economy. Housing sales had been near record levels, auto sales near record levels, and so by lowering interest rates, the Fed was keeping those things affordable and keeping the economy afloat. I had occasion to talk to someone who asked to remain unnamed, but who is familiar with how the government works during periods of crisis when it comes to economic matters, and obviously says that the New York Federal Reserve needs to, and some of this is rather technical, check how all the financial parties who have obligations to one another in Lower Manhattan are doing right now. It's a so-called settlement process. Who can make good on what trade or investment to whom? The New York Federal Reserve, as we stated earlier, has promised to provide enough money to keep the economy afloat through this difficult period, given that the center of the financial world has been attacked today. There is a process that will go forward. What is impaired physically in terms of trading systems, exchanges that are housed in the World Trade Center? What isn't? How are the books in shape? These are the issues that economic policymakers, Tom, have to deal with in the next 24 hours. There has been a great deal of speculation that the New York Stock Exchange will not open for business tomorrow. We don't know that to be true. Some worry that you don't disrupt financial markets regardless of what's going on in the world, because the disruption, even if for another day, can have a bigger psychological effect on the markets than if the market were to open and absorb the reaction to this calamity today, Tom.
All right, thank you very much. CNBC's Ron Insana, who was on a different kind of an assignment today when he was caught when that first building went down there, and we're grateful, obviously, that he was able to get out of there after a pretty terrifying time for him and for so many other people as well. we're now in that difficult period of trying to determine just how many people still are trapped in the World Trade Center area, people who were outside the building as well as within those towers when they came down. The rescue efforts have been proceeding cautiously because so many buildings down there are unstable. There was a lot of collateral damage when the buildings came down.